Throughout the mists of Japan's long and intricate history, few figures have captured the imagination of the world as profoundly as the samurai. They emerge from the scrolls of time not merely as warriors, but as living embodiments of a complex and demanding code, a tapestry woven from loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. Their existence stretches beyond simple battlefields, touching every aspect of Japanese culture, politics, and spirit. Tonight, as we journey softly through these quiet corridors of the past, we shall seek to understand the true nature of the samurai, not the mythic heroes of modern imagination, but the real men who dedicated their lives to a path known as Bushido, the way of the warrior. The samurai were not born into their roles lightly. From the earliest days, their path was one of discipline, study, and rigorous training, stretching from the tender years of childhood into the full strength of adulthood. Swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, and military strategy were their daily bread. Yet their education did not end at the edge of the battlefield. Poetry, calligraphy, philosophy, and governance were considered equally vital. A samurai was expected to cultivate the mind with the same intensity as the body, mastering both arts of war and arts of peace. In this balance, they found a deeper meaning of existence, one that transcended mere survival or conquest. The origins of the samurai stretch back to the early Heian period, around the 8th century, when regional landowners, the daimyo, required loyal retainers to defend their estates against the growing instability of a decentralized imperial authority. These retainers, skilled in martial arts and unwavering in loyalty, gradually coalesced into a distinct social class. Over centuries, they became not only the backbone of Japanese military might, but also the stewards of a moral ideal, guardians of a system that prized honor above life itself. Central to the samurai's existence was Bushido, an unwritten, evolving code of conduct that emphasized values such as courage, integrity, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. It was not a set of laws inscribed in stone, but rather a living ethos passed down through stories, teachings, and the examples set by revered ancestors. To violate Bushido was to lose one's honor, a fate deemed worse than death. Ritual suicide, known as seppuku, became a grim testament to this ideal, an act of profound sincerity where a disgraced samurai could reclaim his lost honor through an agonizing and public self-sacrifice. Yet the reality of the samurai's life was far more nuanced than these grim portraits suggest. They were not always the stoic, unblemished paragons we might imagine. Politics, ambition, betrayal, and human frailty were as much a part of their world as discipline and loyalty. Some rose through acts of great cunning, others fell by yielding to temptation or by miscalculating the shifting tides of power. The samurai were human beings, grappling with the immense weight of their obligations, striving toward an ideal that, like a distant mountain peak, often seemed forever out of reach. The tools of the samurai, their swords, particularly the katana, have acquired a near mythic status in modern times. Yet to the samurai themselves, the sword was not merely a weapon, it was a soul made tangible, a sacred object that represented the very essence of their duty and identity. Forged by master craftsmen through painstaking rituals, tempered by fire and folded countless times to achieve an unbreakable sharpness, each blade carried with it a story, a lineage, a spirit. To lose one's sword was to lose a part of one's very being. Equally important were the rituals and customs that defined a samurai's daily life. The careful attention to dress, the meditative rituals of preparing armor, the ceremonial practice of bowing, greeting, and exchanging gifts. All these actions were imbued with a sense of solemnity and purpose. Even the simple act of drinking tea, performed within the structured serenity of a tea ceremony, became an exercise in mindfulness and an affirmation of life's transient beauty. The samurai's relationship with death was unique, for he did not fear it as an end to be avoided, but embraced it as an inevitable, even necessary, part of the warrior's path. Life was seen as a momentary loan from the cosmos, and true peace came from fulfilling one's duty without hesitation, even at the cost of life itself. In this way, the samurai lived every day with the understanding that it might be his last, striving to leave behind a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of honor. Over the centuries, the role of the samurai evolved. As Japan entered periods of peace, particularly under the Tokugawa shogunate, the sword was gradually sheathed, and the warrior became an administrator, a bureaucrat, a scholar. The spirit of Bushido adapted, finding new expressions in the arts of governance, philosophy, and culture. Yet the heart of the samurai ideal remained unchanged, a devotion to duty, to community, and to an invisible standard higher than any individual ambition. When the Meiji Restoration of the 19th century swept away the old order, abolishing the samurai class in favor of a modern, Western-influenced army, the spirit of the samurai did not vanish. It transformed, leaving deep roots in the soil of Japanese national identity. Echoes of Bushido can still be heard in modern Japan, in the quiet perseverance of its people, in the pursuit of excellence, in the understated dignity with which hardships are endured. Tonight, as we drift through these reflections, the figure of the samurai stands not merely as a relic of a vanished age, but as a timeless symbol of the human striving toward ideals greater than oneself. Their secrets, their struggles, and their silent courage continue to inspire, whispering to us across the centuries the eternal truth, that true strength lies not in domination, but in unwavering devotion to what is just, honorable, and good. The earliest roots of the samurai tradition lie deep within the shifting sands of Japan's ancient past, in a time before the warriors came to be known as samurai. In the centuries preceding their rise, Japan was ruled under an imperial system heavily influenced by Chinese models, with an emperor regarded as a divine figure presiding over a vast, decentralized landscape. Yet, the emperor's reach could not stretch evenly across the rugged mountains and mist-shrouded valleys of the islands. As a result, local aristocratic families, the Uji clans, gradually amassed both political and military power within their territories, establishing the conditions that would give birth to a new kind of warrior. During the Heian period, which began in the late 8th century, the need for private armies grew. At first, the imperial court in Kyoto relied heavily on aristocrats to maintain order in the provinces. These landowning elites required loyal fighters to protect their estates, to collect taxes, and to suppress rebellions. Thus, the first warrior bands emerged, groups of men skilled in mounted archery, swordsmanship, and tactical warfare. Over generations, these warriors evolved from mere servants into an independent social class, one with its own customs, duties, and unwritten codes of behavior. Unlike the romantic image often conjured today, the early samurai were far from the polished figures of solemn dignity. They were rough, pragmatic, and deeply entangled in the feudal rivalries that defined their world. Battles were not fought according to an ideal of honor, but rather were ruthless affairs of ambushes, skirmishes, and shifting alliances. Still, amidst the turmoil, certain ideals began to crystallize, ideals that would, in time, coalesce into the philosophy of Bushido. In these formative centuries, the primary weapon of the warrior was the bow, not the sword. Mastery of mounted archery, yabusame, was considered the highest martial skill, requiring extraordinary balance, focus, and discipline. Warriors trained from a young age to control their horses with their knees while drawing and firing their longbows with deadly precision, a testament to both physical mastery and mental control. These skills were not merely tools of war, but expressions of an evolving ethos that valued discipline, concentration, and unity with one's surroundings. The early warriors also lived by a sense of personal loyalty, though not yet to abstract ideals like honor or virtue. Loyalty was owed primarily to one's immediate lord and to one's family. Clan feuds were common, and violence could erupt swiftly over matters of pride, inheritance, or ambition. The culture of the warrior in these times was one of survival, where strength determined success and the protection of one's lineage was paramount. Over time, certain families rose above the rest, consolidating their influence across broad swaths of the countryside. Chief among them were the Taira and Minamoto clans, whose rivalries would eventually shape the destiny of the entire nation. Their story, culminating in the epic Genpei War of the 12th century, would see the warrior class move from regional enforcers to rulers of Japan itself, ushering in the era of the shogunate. It was during these turbulent years that the figure of the samurai as a distinct entity began to take shape. Titles and ranks were bestowed, symbols of authority were crafted, and rituals to honor loyalty and bravery became more formalized. The sword began to assume a more prominent role, not merely as a weapon, but as a symbol of status and soul. The katana, though not yet the supreme emblem it would become, started to eclipse the bow in cultural significance. Yet even as samurai ideals took firmer root, the world in which they lived remained unpredictable. Political intrigue, betrayal, and shifting loyalties were ever-present dangers. To navigate this treacherous landscape required more than strength. It demanded wisdom, patience, and a keen understanding of human nature. Those who survived and thrived were those who learned to balance force with subtlety, courage with caution. Meanwhile, the imperial court, still ensconced in its rituals and ceremonies, grew increasingly detached from the realities of provincial life. As the aristocrats composed poetry and debated aesthetics, real power flowed inexorably toward the sword-bearing clans of the countryside. The age of the courtier was giving way to the age of the warrior. In these early centuries, the seeds were planted for the ideals that would come to define the samurai legacy: duty, loyalty, self-discipline, and an unshakable commitment to a cause greater than oneself. Though the path ahead would be long and fraught with change, the foundation had been laid. The samurai were no longer merely hired swords. They were becoming the stewards of a unique and enduring vision of life, one that saw the warrior not merely as a killer, but as a guardian of a sacred social order. As we drift further into this ancient world, we can almost hear the distant thunder of hooves across wide plains, the whistle of arrows through misty air, and the quiet resolve of men who understood that to live fully was to live always in the shadow of death, ready to meet it without regret. As the 12th century drew to a close, Japan stood on the threshold of a profound transformation. The long, bloody conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans, known as the Genpei War, had ravaged the land and exhausted the imperial court's authority. In its place arose a new political order, one that would place the warrior class firmly at the helm of Japanese society for centuries to come. With the victory of Minamoto no Yoritomo and the establishment of the Kamakura shogunate in 1192, the age of the samurai had truly begun. This new system, known as bakufu, literally tent government, reflected the military origins of its rulers. Though the emperor still sat on the throne in Kyoto, his role had become largely ceremonial. Real power now rested with the shogun, the supreme military commander who governed in the emperor's name but wielded authority in his own right. It was a pragmatic arrangement, born from the necessities of war and the reality of power, but it fundamentally reshaped Japan's political and cultural landscape. Under the Kamakura shogunate, the samurai evolved from provincial warriors into the pillars of a new social hierarchy. Lands were distributed as rewards for loyalty, creating a network of vassalage where lords, known as daimyo, commanded the service of their samurai retainers. In return, samurai pledged to defend their lords to the death, embodying a bond that blended feudal obligation with a deep sense of personal honor. Life under the new regime was governed by an emerging set of laws, the most significant of which was the Joey Code of 1232. This legal code formalized many aspects of samurai conduct, land inheritance, and dispute resolution, helping to stabilize a society still recovering from the chaos of civil war. Yet even as rules were codified, the essence of samurai life remained steeped in personal duty, martial prowess, and the constant readiness for conflict. The Kamakura era also witnessed one of the most extraordinary tests of samurai resilience, the Mongol invasions of Japan. In the late 13th century, the vast Mongol Empire, having conquered most of Asia, turned its gaze eastward. Kublai Khan demanded Japan's submission, and when the shogunate refused, the Mongols launched two massive invasion attempts in 1274 and again in 1281. The Mongols brought with them unfamiliar tactics, massed infantry assaults, coordinated archery, and explosive gunpowder weapons that initially overwhelmed the traditional samurai style of individual combat. Samurai warriors, trained to seek out honorable duels, found themselves facing disciplined ranks of enemy soldiers who fought in tight formations without regard for personal glory. It was a harrowing lesson in the changing nature of warfare, yet the samurai adapted, employing defensive strategies, constructing coastal fortifications, and harrying the Mongol forces at every opportunity. Ultimately, nature played a decisive role. In both invasions, fierce typhoons, later called kamikaze or divine winds, destroyed the Mongol fleets, saving Japan from conquest. The miraculous storms reinforced a belief among the Japanese that their land was protected by the gods, and the legend of the kamikaze became an enduring symbol of national resilience. Despite these victories, the Mongol invasion strained the Kamakura shogunate to its limits. Rewarding the samurai proved difficult, as there was no conquered land to distribute. Dissatisfaction grew among the warrior class, leading to internal unrest that would, in time, contribute to the downfall of the Kamakura regime. During this era, the spiritual life of the samurai also began to evolve. The teachings of Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on meditation, self-discipline, and acceptance of impermanence, found a deep resonance among the warrior class. The silent contemplation of life and death, the pursuit of inner calm amid chaos, these ideals melded seamlessly with the demands of the samurai path. Zen would leave an indelible mark on samurai culture, influencing everything from their martial practices to their aesthetic sensibilities. Art and architecture flourished as well. Simple, sturdy wooden temples reflected the samurai's preference for understated strength over ostentation. Gardens designed for quiet reflection, monochrome ink paintings capturing the fleeting beauty of nature, and poetry that distilled profound emotions into a few spare lines. All these expressions took root during this time, nurtured by the fusion of martial and spiritual ideals. The Kamakura period thus stands as a critical turning point in samurai history. It solidified their role not merely as warriors, but as rulers, administrators, and patrons of a distinct cultural ethos. The ideals of loyalty, discipline, and courage, though still evolving, had found firm foundations. The samurai were no longer simply servants to the aristocracy. They were now the architects of Japan's destiny. Yet even in triumph, the seeds of future turmoil were being sown. The pressures of maintaining loyalty without tangible rewards, the challenges of adapting to new forms of warfare, and the ever-present rivalries among powerful clans would soon erode the stability of the Kamakura shogunate. Another age of strife loomed on the horizon, one that would test the mettle of the samurai in ways they had never before imagined. Tonight, as we journey through the twilight fields of medieval Japan, we can almost glimpse the silent rows of samurai guards standing watch beneath flickering lanterns, their armor polished and their swords ready, steadfast in their duty, yet haunted by the silent knowledge that no fortress stands forever against the tides of time. Following the decline of the Kamakura shogunate, Japan entered a period of profound instability and internal strife. The structures that had once upheld the authority of the samurai elite crumbled, leaving a fractured landscape of competing factions, shifting loyalties, and near-constant warfare. It was during this era, spanning the 14th and 15th centuries, that the samurai were forced to confront the brutal realities of a world unmoored from a central power, a time remembered for its chaos, ambition, and bloodshed. The immediate catalyst for this upheaval was the fall of the Hojo clan, who had served as regents to the shoguns. Discontent among powerful families and the erosion of loyalty led to rebellion, culminating in the brief Kenmu Restoration, an attempt by Emperor Go-Daigo to restore direct imperial rule. However, the emperor's efforts faltered, and soon the land was plunged into the Nanboku-cho period, the time of the northern and southern courts, where rival imperial factions each claimed legitimacy and sought the support of samurai lords to enforce their claims. For the samurai, this was both a time of opportunity and of profound peril. With the old bonds of feudal loyalty weakened, warriors were often driven by personal ambition, seeking to expand their domains and secure their own power. Alliances were made and broken with little warning. Betrayal and treachery became commonplace. The ideals of Bushido, though still revered, were tested against the harsh necessities of survival and conquest. Battles during this period were fierce and frequent. Castles, once simple fortifications, evolved into elaborate defensive structures capable of withstanding prolonged sieges. The art of warfare itself advanced, with new strategies emphasizing massed infantry tactics and combined arms operations. Samurai leaders, known as daimyo, built private armies of both samurai and ashigaru, foot soldiers drawn from the peasantry, to wage their campaigns. The countryside suffered greatly. Fields lay fallow, villages were burned, and countless lives were lost in the relentless conflicts. Yet even amid the devastation, a new political reality began to take shape. Power increasingly concentrated in the hands of regional daimyo, whose authority was based not on imperial sanction, but on their ability to command loyalty and maintain control over their territories. This decentralized power structure laid the groundwork for the Sengoku period, the age of warring states, which would come to define the next century of Japanese history. In the Sengoku era, the dream of unity would seem a distant memory, as mighty warlords vied for supremacy over the shattered remnants of the realm. Culturally, the period of unrest paradoxically spurred innovation and artistic growth. The tea ceremony, refined into a spiritual practice under the influence of Zen, became a symbol of serenity amid chaos. Ink painting flourished, capturing the stark beauty of a transient world. No theater, with its austere, hypnotic performances, emerged as a powerful medium for exploring themes of duty, loss, and the passage of time, themes intimately familiar to the warriors of the age. The ideals of Bushido, though strained, also evolved during this time. The emphasis on personal loyalty to one's immediate lord, rather than abstract allegiance to a distant emperor or shogun, became more pronounced. Honor was still prized, but it was increasingly interpreted through the lens of pragmatic survival and feudal duty. Ritual suicide, or seppuku, remained an ultimate act of loyalty and atonement, but its practice became more ritualized, with specific protocols governing when and how it should be performed. The life of a samurai during these turbulent centuries was marked by a constant tension between the warrior's spiritual aspirations and the brutal demands of the battlefield. To live honorably meant navigating a world where power was often won by deceit as much as by valor, where loyalty could be repaid with betrayal, and where even the most revered warriors could find their fortunes reversed overnight. Yet despite the turmoil, or perhaps because of it, the samurai spirit endured. In the face of chaos, they clung to their traditions, their rituals, and their ideals, seeking meaning amid the uncertainty. The enduring image of the samurai as a figure of resilience, dignity, and unwavering commitment took deep root during these dark and violent years. By the end of the 15th century, Japan was a patchwork of competing fiefdoms, each ruled by ambitious daimyo, seeking to expand their influence. The dream of a unified land seemed almost unattainable, but in the distance, on the horizon of history, figures were already rising who would seek to tame the chaos and forge a new order. Leaders who would harness the might of the samurai to build, for the first time in generations, a nation united under a single rule. As we drift through the veiled landscapes of this fractured age, we can almost hear the clash of steel upon steel echoing through misty valleys, the somber drums of approaching armies rolling like distant thunder, and the quiet, determined footsteps of warriors bound by a code that demanded honor even as the world around them crumbled. Amidst the lingering fog of centuries of warfare, as Japan lay divided and bleeding from countless battles, there arose a generation of leaders who would forever alter the course of the nation's destiny. The Sengoku period, a time when might ruled supreme and the sword determined the future, gave birth to three towering figures: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Each, in his own way, harnessed the spirit and strength of the samurai to forge a new Japan, one bound not by chaos, but by order and enduring authority. Oda Nobunaga was the first to shatter the old ways. A ruthless and brilliant strategist, Nobunaga recognized that the traditions and loyalties of the past were ill-suited to the brutal realities of his time. He employed new technologies, most notably the arquebus, an early firearm, and innovative battlefield tactics that emphasized discipline, mass formations, and overwhelming firepower. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, Nobunaga's forces decimated the famed cavalry of the Takeda clan through the disciplined use of arquebuses, signaling a shift from the individualized combat favored by traditional samurai to more modern, coordinated warfare. Nobunaga's vision extended beyond the battlefield. He sought to break the power of the Buddhist warrior monks who controlled vast swathes of territory and challenged the authority of secular lords. Ruthlessly, he attacked the fortified temples of Mount Hiei, burning them to the ground in a campaign that shocked even his contemporaries. To Nobunaga, the unification of Japan required the destruction of any rival sources of power, whether religious or feudal. His actions laid the groundwork for a centralized state, but also earned him many enemies. Despite his successes, Nobunaga's journey was cut short. In 1582, betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, Nobunaga met his end in a dramatic act of forced suicide at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto. Yet his vision did not die with him. His ambitious general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, swiftly avenged his death and continued the work of unifying Japan. Hideyoshi's rise from humble origins, the son of a peasant foot soldier, to the de facto ruler of Japan, is one of the most extraordinary stories in the annals of samurai history. A master of both diplomacy and warfare, Hideyoshi used a combination of military conquest, strategic marriages, and political acumen to bring the fractious daimyo under his control. He introduced sweeping reforms that sought to stabilize society. Weapons were confiscated from the peasantry in the famous sword hunt, reinforcing the distinction between warrior and farmer. A rigid class structure was established, and great construction projects, including the magnificent Osaka Castle, symbolized the newfound unity of the land. Hideyoshi also sought to project Japanese power beyond its shores. In the 1590s, he launched ambitious, but ultimately disastrous, invasions of Korea, campaigns that drained resources and cost thousands of lives. His dreams of overseas conquest died with him in 1598, leaving Japan poised once again on the brink of civil war. Into this fragile moment stepped Tokugawa Ieyasu, a patient and calculating leader who had long bided his time, weaving a complex web of alliances and securing his power base in the Kanto region. Ieyasu's forces clashed with those loyal to Hideyoshi's young heir at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, a titanic confrontation that would determine the future of Japan. Victory at Sekigahara secured Ieyasu's dominance, and in 1603 he was granted the title of shogun by the emperor, formally inaugurating the Tokugawa shogunate. With Tokugawa's rise, Japan entered a new era of peace and stability, the Edo period, that would last for over 2.5 centuries. The wild tumult of the Sengoku period gave way to an age where the sword was largely sheathed, and the samurai found themselves transitioning from battlefield commanders to bureaucrats, administrators, and stewards of a carefully ordered society. Yet even as the outward role of the samurai changed, the ideals that had guided them through centuries of bloodshed, loyalty, duty, honor, remained at the heart of their identity. The great leaders who forged Japan's unity understood that force alone could not sustain an empire. It required a shared sense of purpose, a disciplined social order, and a reverence for the traditions that gave meaning to the warrior's path. The unification of Japan was not merely a political triumph. It was a triumph of vision, of endurance, and of the unyielding spirit of the samurai, who, through countless generations, had struggled and sacrificed in the pursuit of a higher ideal. They had endured betrayal, hardship, and endless war, yet through it all they had preserved something intangible and indestructible: a code, a way of life, a mirror held up to the best and worst of human nature. Tonight, as we journey through the silent castles and ancient roads of a Japan newly reborn, we can almost hear the distant echo of banners unfurling in the morning breeze, the solemn procession of armored warriors riding toward an uncertain destiny, and the quiet, enduring heartbeat of a people who, through war and peace alike, never lost sight of the path they had vowed to walk. With the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate in the early 17th century, Japan entered a time unlike any it had known before. For the first time in centuries, the land was largely at peace. The endless wars and shifting allegiances of the past gave way to a rigid, carefully maintained order that governed every aspect of life. For the samurai, this new era presented a profound transformation. From warriors of the battlefield to guardians of a social structure, from swordsmen to stewards of a peaceful state. Under Tokugawa rule, Japan was organized into a strict hierarchy. At the top stood the emperor, revered but politically powerless. Below him were the shogun and the military aristocracy, the samurai, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. This order was not merely a matter of social convention. It was enforced through laws, rituals, and customs designed to maintain harmony and prevent the chaos that had once torn the nation apart. Samurai retained their privileged position, but the nature of their duties shifted dramatically. With few battles left to fight, many became administrators, judges, and scholars. They were tasked with managing the domains of their lords, collecting taxes, adjudicating disputes, and overseeing the day-to-day affairs of the land. Literacy among samurai rose sharply, and education in Confucian principles became widespread, reinforcing ideals of loyalty, filial piety, and social responsibility. The sword remained a potent symbol of samurai status, but its practical use diminished. Laws strictly regulated the wearing of swords, and only samurai were permitted to bear the daisho, the paired long and short swords that symbolized their authority. The katana, once a weapon of war, became an heirloom, a ceremonial object imbued with profound spiritual significance. Despite outward prosperity, this peaceful existence created a tension at the heart of the samurai identity. Their traditions were born in war, their virtues forged in hardship and sacrifice. In an age of peace, many struggled to reconcile their warrior heritage with the demands of bureaucratic life. The romantic ideal of Bushido, now increasingly codified and idealized, sometimes stood in stark contrast to the realities of daily existence: debt, political intrigue, and personal frustration. This internal conflict found expression in many aspects of Edo period culture. The rise of Bushido literature, including works like Yamamoto Tsunetomo's Hagakure, reflected a nostalgic longing for the lost purity of the warrior spirit. The Hagakure spoke of a life lived in constant readiness for death, of the samurai as a man who must embrace mortality with serene acceptance. Yet for many samurai of the time, such ideals were aspirational rather than practical, echoes of a world that no longer existed. The arts also flourished in this period. The strict, disciplined practices of martial arts, such as kenjutsu, kyudo, archery, and jujutsu, became highly systematized, preserving ancient skills even as their practical application waned. Painting, poetry, and the tea ceremony became central to the samurai's cultivation of inner refinement. Calligraphy was not merely a pastime, but a discipline, requiring the same focus and presence demanded by the sword. Zen Buddhism, too, continued to influence samurai philosophy. Meditation, simplicity, and a focus on the impermanence of all things helped many reconcile their martial origins with their new roles. The aesthetics of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence, infused the arts, from garden design to the construction of temples and homes. Yet beneath the surface, cracks began to appear. Many lower-ranking samurai, burdened by declining stipends and rising costs, lived in poverty, unable to engage in commerce or farming, forbidden by their status to pursue other means of livelihood. Some descended into hardship, selling their swords or serving as mercenaries in times of unrest. The ideal of the samurai as a noble, selfless servant of society clashed painfully with the realities of economic necessity. This period also saw the emergence of the ronin, masterless samurai, who, through the death or disgrace of their lords, found themselves adrift in a society that prized loyalty above all else. Some ronin sought new masters, while others turned to crime, forming bands of outlaws or hiring themselves out as bodyguards and enforcers. The existence of ronin was a stark reminder of the precariousness of samurai life, even in an age of supposed stability. Still, the Tokugawa era was one of relative peace and remarkable cultural development. Urban centers like Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto blossomed into vibrant cities, teeming with markets, theaters, and schools. Kabuki theater, woodblock printing, and haiku poetry captured the imaginations of both the common people and the aristocracy. Through it all, the samurai maintained their place as the moral and cultural stewards of society, even as their traditional role faded ever further into memory. The stability of the Tokugawa shogunate, however, came at a price. Isolation from the outside world, enforced through policies of sakoku, closed Japan's doors to most foreign influences, While this protected Japanese culture from external disruption, it also left the country vulnerable to the changes sweeping across the world beyond its shores. In the distance, the faint rumblings of foreign ships and new ideas would soon signal the end of the old order. Tonight, as we walk through the serene gardens and quiet halls of Edo, we can almost see the samurai tending to their duties with meticulous care, their swords gleaming but rarely drawn, their hearts still bound by an ancient code, even as the world around them slowly, imperceptibly, begins to change. The winds of change, long held at bay by the walls of isolation, finally reached Japan's shores in the mid-19th century. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy arrived with a fleet of black ships, their cannons poised as much for diplomacy as for war. His demands for trade and open ports marked the beginning of a profound and irreversible transformation. For the samurai, whose traditions had been meticulously preserved for centuries, the arrival of Western powers signaled not just a political crisis, but an existential threat to their way of life. The Tokugawa shogunate, recognizing the futility of resisting Western military power, signed treaties that opened Japan to foreign trade and influence. These concessions, perceived by many as humiliations, eroded the shogunate's authority and sparked widespread unrest. Domains that had long harbored resentment toward Tokugawa rule seized upon the opportunity to challenge the existing order, rallying under the banners of imperial loyalty and national revitalization. Among the samurai, reactions to the Western intrusion were deeply divided. Some, recognizing the inevitability of change, advocated for modernization, the adoption of Western technology, military tactics, and governmental structures. Others, steeped in the ideals of Bushido and fiercely protective of Japan's traditions, called for resistance, even at the cost of their own lives. The final years of the Tokugawa regime saw increasing clashes between pro-imperial and pro-shogunate forces. Samurai found themselves once again called to battle, not against foreign invaders, but against each other. The Boshin War of 1868-1869, a brief but intense civil conflict, pitted the forces of the collapsing shogunate against the armies of the newly empowered imperial faction. Victory belonged to the imperial loyalists. The Meiji Restoration, proclaimed in 1868, marked the formal end of the shogunate and the restoration of political power to the emperor, though in truth, real authority shifted to a new cadre of modernizing leaders. In their vision of a new Japan, there was little place for the old samurai order. The new government moved swiftly to dismantle the foundations of samurai privilege. The wearing of swords in public was prohibited. Hereditary stipends were abolished. A national conscript army, modeled on Western lines, replaced the feudal levies. The social distinctions that had once elevated the samurai above farmers, artisans, and merchants were erased. In the span of a few decades, a class that had defined Japan for centuries was swept away. For many samurai, the loss of status, livelihood, and identity was devastating. Some adapted, finding new roles as government officials, businessmen, and intellectuals. Others struggled with poverty, humiliation, and a profound sense of displacement. Still others chose a path of defiance. The most famous manifestation of this resistance was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, often hailed as the last true samurai. Saigo, once a key figure in the Meiji Restoration, became disillusioned with the direction of the new government. Viewing it as a betrayal of samurai ideals and Japanese sovereignty, he rallied thousands of disaffected former samurai in open revolt. The rebellion was marked by fierce battles and acts of extraordinary courage, but it was ultimately doomed. The imperial army, equipped with modern weaponry and disciplined along Western lines, proved too powerful. At the Battle of Shiroyama, Saigo and his remaining followers made their final stand. Refusing to surrender, they fought to the last man. Saigo himself, gravely wounded, took his own life in the manner of the samurai tradition, through ritual suicide. The fall of the Satsuma Rebellion marked the symbolic end of the samurai era. Though individual samurai lived on and their descendants contributed to the fabric of modern Japan, the class itself ceased to exist. The sword, once the soul of the warrior, became a relic, displayed in museums, rather than drawn in defense of honor or lord. Yet even in defeat, the spirit of the samurai endured. It lived on in the codes of discipline instilled in the modern Japanese military. It breathed in the arts, the literature, and the national identity that revered loyalty, perseverance, and duty. In countless small ways, the ethos of the samurai continued to shape the character of a nation hurtling toward an uncertain future. As we wander through the fading light of this vanished world, we can almost see the proud figures of samurai standing atop misty hills, gazing silently at a horizon they would never reach, their armor battered, their swords gleaming one last time, beneath a dying sun, bearing witness to the end of an age they had fought so long to uphold. Though the era of the samurai has long since passed into history, their spirit endures, woven deeply into the fabric of Japan and resonating far beyond its shores. The legacy of the samurai is not confined to dusty chronicles or weathered artifacts. It lives on in the ideals they championed, in the disciplines they perfected, and in the quiet strength with which they faced both life and death. At the heart of the samurai legacy lies Bushido, the way of the warrior. Though its precise contours evolved over centuries, Bushido consistently emphasized values that transcend time and place: loyalty to one's principles, courage in the face of adversity, respect for others, honesty in action, and honor above personal gain. These ideals, first cultivated on blood-stained battlefields, later permeated civilian life, informing the codes of conduct for officials, merchants, and even artists in the peaceful eras that followed. Bushido found new expressions in the modern era. During Japan's rapid industrialization and emergence onto the world stage, the samurai spirit, reinterpreted through the lens of national identity, provided a foundation for resilience, perseverance, and collective strength. Yet the deeper, more personal aspects of Bushido also survived. The quiet dignity in fulfilling one's duties, the relentless pursuit of mastery, and the unwavering commitment to living, and if necessary, dying, according to one's convictions. The arts that the samurai cultivated continue to thrive. The disciplined practice of martial arts, kendo, kyudo, iaido, preserves not only ancient techniques, but also the philosophies of focus, presence, and self-control. The austere beauty of Zen-inspired gardens, the elegance of the tea ceremony, the restrained brushstrokes of calligraphy, all these are echoes of a culture that prized both strength and subtlety, action and reflection. Samurai also left a profound mark on the literary and philosophical traditions of Japan. Their stories, whether preserved in historical epics, folk tales, or modern novels, explore timeless themes of loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption. Figures like Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman and strategist, continue to inspire readers with his writings on strategy and the warrior mindset, particularly his famous work, The Book of Five Rings. Even in the global imagination, the samurai hold a special place. They are seen not merely as warriors, but as exemplars of an ethos that transcends violence, a commitment to ideals greater than oneself. Films, literature, and art across the world have drawn upon samurai traditions to explore universal questions of duty, honor, and the nature of true strength. Yet it is important to remember that the samurai were not perfect beings, nor unblemished heroes. Their history is filled with contradictions, moments of brutality, ambition, and failure, alongside their noblest deeds. They were ultimately human, striving, often imperfectly, to live according to principles that demanded more than most could ever fully achieve. In their humanity, the samurai offer not a blueprint for perfection, but a mirror reflecting the eternal struggle between the ideals we aspire to and the realities we face. Their lives remind us that honor is not a state granted by birth or title, but a daily choice, a path walked one step at a time, often in the face of hardship and doubt. Today, as Japan stands as a vibrant modern nation, the spirit of the samurai lingers in the meticulous craftsmanship of its artisans, in the resilience of its people in times of disaster, in the quiet courtesy of everyday interactions, and in the reverence for history that acknowledges both triumph and tragedy. The samurai are gone, their castles reduced to stones, their swords now resting behind glass, their banners faded into legend. Yet their path, the unyielding pursuit of duty, the cultivation of inner strength, the embrace of life's impermanence, remains a living force, as relevant today as it was on the misty battlefields of centuries past. As we close this quiet journey through the world of the samurai, let us remember that their true legacy is not found in the battles they fought or the power they wielded, but in the ideals they cherished, and in the timeless call to live with courage, integrity, and purpose. Tonight, as we drift into sleep, we carry with us the echoes of that ancient path, a whisper across the centuries, reminding us that true strength lies not in domination, but in the unwavering dedication to a life of honor, compassion, and unwavering resolve.